email
have
it.
a choice.
Okay.
That's right.
Got it.
Okay. Yes. Everybody,
Okay.
welcome. I'm very excited that we have Dr. Annie Green and John Hovell, who is going to be our host today to talk about knowledge graphs in the digital transformation era. So let me hand it off to, I think, Annie. If please start your presentation.
Okay. You want me to kick it off? Let me share this for a second. Oops. Why did it go to there? I actually clicked on that one. Okay. I just wanted to start out with, I know it's not starting out with knowledge graphs because before we can actually do knowledge graphs, because knowledge graphs are actually semantic networks, so we have to kind of have, and they're actually real world entities. So we have to think about what it is we're trying to put together in the relationships. So the digital twin of an enterprise, especially when I heard Pam talk about strategy and strategic direction, we need to understand within the enterprise what it is we're working with when we're developing networks. I mean, hence neural networks, all of these other types of semantic networks that we have, and which is something that comes out of the knowledge era. But unfortunately, we have decoupled intelligence and knowledge, so to speak. And it seems like we're on separate paths. So what we need is a duplicate of the real world within our enterprise so that we understand how each component actually works. And it has to be a real world. So mine is, before we can move forward with that, we have to change the current narrative. In KM, we have seen every year this triangle that goes from data to wisdom. It's not something that I've liked using, but that's what's been out there. And I'm saying we have to now think about, in a digital transformation, that we're representing the enterprise. So therefore, data and information are important because that's our operations. But we get to intelligence, which is that business intelligence that we keep going up and down on again. Just like with knowledge management, we peaked and valleyed, and we're doing the same thing with intelligence. But the two of those are not mutually exclusive, and they have to be together if you're going to be putting together these knowledge maps to give you information out. And at the top being cognition. So this is the new narrative that I'm saying with the triangle, kind of get rid of it, and let's look more at the components that we need to have in place and define them. This is just another offtake of a model that was existing and putting intelligence into place, because the whole need, even with a network of values, is that you want to be able to exploit the past and then explore the future. So you want to be able to forecast out. And building up on this, you start with the raw data, you move into domain specific areas, and then you get actionable data, which drives knowledge, because knowledge is the use and action of that data that you have. And then once you begin to live that dynamically, you become aware of it, and it increases with experience. And real quick, cognitive enterprise system. So this is just setting the ground for this knowledge graphs that we're talking about. And we have to, again, real world, we're trying to put thinking into a system the same way that we actually think as humans. And the whole thing is the neural network is actually our mind, which is the colloidal effects that happen within us. So we have to think about that network and how it works. And most of these things exist. We have performance measurement, but is the data that we're pulling in there representative of what we're doing? We need change management, because most initiatives fail if you don't have change management. We need learning, because you don't want to just arbitrarily pick something without learning that it's going to add the value that you need before you put it into the organization. Knowledge management, it has to be good knowledge. We got to know that it represents what we need to know in order to be successful. And intelligence is that network that we're we're putting together. And it has to be based on that body of information and data that is semantic, which takes you right back to democratization, that, everybody speaking the same language, and also just having like a common business language, and then have a thesaurus. Because right now we tend to try to keep defining things, like even the term knowledge management. We've been trying to define that for years, and we haven't come up with an exact definition of it. And then off to the side, you see, while we're doing this, we're also into the social culture, and we have to take into consideration the core in these networks, which is the people. So we have to look at the culture, the DEI, the behaviors, organization behaviors, and others types of attributes that fall into this. Real quick, this is a kind of a complex slide, but it just takes you back to, again, when we, it takes you back to again, when we start out with planning and operations and then performance, we got to look at the structure of the organization, because when you go through the structure of an organization, you're going to wind up at various levels of abstraction, and you need to be able to represent those levels. And that strategy should be tied to those levels. And that's where they actually look at tangible assets, which is money. But if we build this twin and we have this network out there of knowledge that we can use, then we can actually begin to use what's called intangible assets, because we start to put the people together and we begin to see who's more profitable, who's bringing in more money, what products are selling well, what technology is actually working. And those are things that we can't touch. So we need to be able to build that network so it's based on value areas. And these value areas are, what do we need to know? Key to knowledge management: customer, competitor, employee, information, partner, process, product, service, and technology. Those are from a survey that I did years ago, asking CEOs, what do you need to know in your organization in order to improve your performance? And they have actually been validated probably every so many years, and the latest one being by MuleSoft. Then we get into these learning systems, because artificial intelligence is, intelligence can be represented in a product, it can be represented in analytics, and it can be represented in the problem solving. So we need to know the level that we're actually applying it, and knowledge, somehow or another, once we get that, we need to capture it, we need to protect it, we need to, make certain that we measure it, and we also need to make certain that we reward and recognize those who are giving the knowledge. So this is just a little spill to get into the knowledge graphs, which kind of gives you that there has to be a foundation in place in order for you to develop these semantics, and in order for you to get the knowledge out of them. I think that's all of it, the four that I had. And my PC is stuck again.
Uh-oh.
It doesn't like to move. Oh, there it is.
Oh, there we go.
Okay. So with that in mind, I guess we could open it up and basically bring about a conversation. So I'll pass it on to John.
Sure, yeah, and I'll do the same thing. I don't no necessary visuals to share with you, but maybe a few words. I guess, I don't know, for me to start with definitions is always kind of a helpful thing. So just to make sure, or I guess I'm curious if we're all thinking about the same things when we're talking about knowledge graphs. Because I guess there's one sort of standard knowledge graph, but there are a couple of ways to get there. So the one that I'm sort of thinking of is the one that's got nodes on it. So it's got, circles or objects on it, elements. And then what really sort of makes it a knowledge graph is the lines that connect those nodes that describe the relationship between those nodes. And so building on Annie's slides there, the nodes, the circles themselves are examples of data. So it's just raw. So an example of like dog or cow or animal, right? That would just be raw data. Then what starts to make it a knowledge graph is the connection that dog is an animal, that line that says is, and then cow is an animal, right? So that's the kind of knowledge graph I'm thinking. But to relate to Annie's slides, what turns it into cognition is stepping back and looking at a single knowledge graph, right? And I really like, and the reason Anna and I partnered up on this is, I don't know that I would call that knowledge, to be honest. And if I want to be a little bit provocative, I'm not sure that I would call the whole approach a knowledge graph. If I were being a little bit spicy, I would actually call it a data relationship graph.
Mhm.
Probably what I would call it if I were really pressing the envelope a little bit. But let's stick with data intelligence, data information intelligence, cognition. The cognition part is fascinating to me, and I hope this then takes us into the digital transformation side of it. Is, to me, if you've got multiple knowledge graphs, if I stick with the original label for the night, if you've got one that's talking about dogs and cows and animals, and one that's talking about we have SharePoint and we have the Atlassian suite and we have this, and here's how they relate to each other, right? And then you've got multiple other graphs of your taxonomy and all of your content management. It's then stepping back and looking across, making sense of all of the knowledge graphs, almost to mapping complexity. Not quite, but let's go there just to be fun. That to me is now getting closer to potentially our latest understanding of how cognition works, looking at complexity through multiple lenses, multiple angles. Does this make sense? What's missing from our data, our information, our intelligence, from sort of a, I guess, a knowledge graph point of view? Okay, so then one last thought on sort of, if that's the same knowledge graph we're all talking about. If not, let's definitely bring that into the group conversation here. The digital transformation side, and I guess the little bit of prep and chat that Annie and I did before is, I think we both agree, but I'll definitely own my own truth of, I still, even in 2022, I still come strong from the perspective of technology enables process, process enables people. And so by design, on purpose, I'm beginning with the culture work, the organization development, group dynamic work. What's going on in this group? And then, is it a digital transformation we're doing, and or is it a cultural transformation we're doing, and or is it a mindset transformation? From that OD, and I do love that partnership between OD and KM, what is it that is present in this group right now? What has our attention? What has our time? What has our priority? That kind of digital transformation work, beginning with people and the relationships between people and the relationships between groups, knowing that that's different than, interpersonal relationships. Then working into, okay, so if this is the group dynamic we have, and by the way, the little spicy thing I want to add here, maybe not even trying to transform it, maybe literally just raising awareness of, this is the existing group dynamic as is described and seen by this group. Seeing that group dynamic, then what is the potential transformation or any change we want to do, maybe, to that group, which is then where you can do process mapping, process work, and then I would move into knowledge graphs, or again, where I think I'll close is, dare we call it a data relationship graph. Julianne, I saw you unmute. Do you want to start us off? What's going on?
I come from a UX background, user experience background,
Hmm.
and I've done a lot of technical training and things. And one of the things that comes up, especially in tech, is the constant change, especially when you're working with code, and trying to understand the shape of existing knowledge in staff members based on their activity, because they're changing the very thing that technology can change and transform based on our interaction with it. So documenting that and having ways of being self-aware while you're documenting, and having an understanding of how your documentation processes are interacting with other people's. And then from that, you have, taxonomies emerge, and then of course ontologies. And I've been working a little bit on my own with things like Obsidian, which is an app, and I'll put that in, and it uses a knowledge graph, and it's basically writing a bunch of markdown notes. Oh, it's not working. Did I not paste it? There you go. And so that's kind of why I'm I unmuted and then muted because I was like, how do I articulate this? But I like the visualization because I've always been a little obsessed with context and how it shapes meaning. And if you have a way of representing context, like you were saying, it really helps in understanding kind of where you're at in the overall trajectories that are at work. And I say in plural trajectories because I don't think they're ever just one when you're dealing with a group, in my opinion. But I come from a user experience background, which is very visualized. And the question I ultimately had is the kind of tooling you're working with. How much of that influences how you understand what you're trying to communicate or capture? Because I also work with a tech startup that is working with VR. Yeah, VR and AR, and how we interact with that is kind of interesting too, especially when you think about context. But from an inclusive design perspective or accessibility for people who aren't visually dependent, then that's a whole nother thing. So anyway, that's where I'm at right now. You can do what you want with that.
Yeah.
That's for both of you, by the way.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. But, I keep thinking that I'm with John. We've jumped to knowledge graphs before we actually thought about data graphs, so to speak. And the interesting thing is that as it evolves and you think about like even data management and you think about the structures of the data, we jump through certain things too. At one point there were networking databases, and those networking databases had relationships in them, and they would probably be correct for this time right now as opposed to relational, because now people don't want relational databases because of the redundancy and stuff. So but here's the thing, there's a difference between digitization and digitalization. Okay, digitization is building it or digitizing something. So in order to get value out of it, you have to represent it. So I agree with you, Julianne, about the context, because things have to be in context. And again, when you're building that structure, you have to go down to the instance, which is the individual component that you are trying to determine the value from. If I'm an employee, and I say, okay, this is the employee, then that instance must represent, everything about me, including if it's social information. If I've taken a personality test and it's captured, then that should be aligned with my person or that instance of data within that network structure, so that, it becomes very complicated. And that's how you get down to the deep learning. So if I begin to cross-pollinate those, I can see, based on my language and based on my structure, I can see what value people contribute. Or I can see if there's correlations across different value areas that are contributing with each other. It might not be, but it's a correlation and it's something worth investigating. So I think that, like you were saying, in context and also representation, we need to take a step back and we need to actually think. And this is where my specialty lies, but we need to actually think in terms of intangible assets. What exactly am I trying to know? Because money, I know. And a lot of times we build our structures based on tangible or money. But the things we don't know, like what employee is the most productive employee? There are ways to tell that. What is the value of an employee? Suppose an employee, when you look within that network and they have worked, and this is in knowledge that they've worked on 5 projects that were very successful, and that employee walked out the door and all of a sudden there was a drop in $20 million. And you realize that the project that dropped was because they weren't getting the same service because this particular employee was critical to it. Those are the type things that you're trying to see and that you're trying to build in these networks or these knowledge graphs. And and they're contextual because you have different industries. So you can have a taxonomy that represents across several industries, but then you have to also put in the specifics and the representation. Like, for example, if I say customer and I go into education, then customer is the student. If I say customer and I go into health, then customer is the patient. So we've got to start thinking in those terms and not trying to apply things without tailoring them to our environment and without having the language that we need within the environment that we're developing them in. So that's why I say early on, most of these knowledge graphs they're semantics based. So if your semantics are wrong, then
Yeah.
what are you looking for? What are you getting out of it?
Yep. Absolutely. Thank you.
Hmm.
Julianne, I wrote in my notes here, constant change, self-awareness, which I loved hearing, and then documentation processes are interacting with each other. Loved that. Want to tweet that one out there. But then I wrote your question as, what tooling are you coming in with, or what tooling are you starting with, especially to understand how you're influencing and capturing? And then I saw Barbara's text. My clarification, Julianne, I think is this: like, when you say what tooling are you working with, my mind wandered off to the old mindset, skill set, tool set. Did you mean like literally what software tooling, or did you mean
I'm,
like what practice or what
it always,
mindset?
I guess to clarify a little bit, there are limitations imposed by how we choose our tools, because the tools constrain to some degree what you can do with them.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering about the invisible way that shapes our ability to really understand and perceive things. And that's why I went off on AR, VR, and stuff like this. It's not that I want to have necessarily a conversation about all the different tools, because that's a constantly evolving thing. But I'm just wondering if either of you have kind of looked at those things and wondered and reflected, wouldn't it be nice if I could articulate this thing, but I'm only able to do it using these methods? Is how the methodology imposes itself on your, does that make sense?
It does. So
And
it is
that's
almost
just
a
an
blend.
aside. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love it. So it is kind of mindset and skill set and tool set. How did you get to knowledge graph, let alone what software did you choose for knowledge graph?
I came across, I think he's Danish. I'll have to look it up. It's a YouTube thing on how to write smart notes. And he was talking about ontologies and taxonomies, because I'm one of those people that collects a lot of information, and I just wanted to understand the patterns that emerge from all of those things and how to focus so that I'm not just collecting things, but actually using the things I've collected in a meaningful way, either to write white papers or, other things like that. So that's because you have these, because so much of what we do, it's not just one industry. There are overlaps between industries. And it's kind of interesting to see the emerging patterns out of those. And I don't want to go on and on. I feel like I'm hogging the time here. But all I'm saying is that, yeah, that's just the nature of my question, was that. Not a big deal. It's just, I was curious.
Beautiful.
No.
I was going to say,
I'll say,
Barbara,
yeah.
do you want to add in there? No?
Who is that?
I'm still trying to figure out all of these things. I play with them, but more like it's a black box that I'm able to play with the tool, but trying to understand exactly how it works and why it does what it does is something I'm just exploring.
Exactly. Me too.
Like, let alone why you chose it or what got you to it, or pros and cons, or advantages, disadvantages, all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. In this case, it was more like, okay, this is the tool we have. We're testing it, but it's not like we actually went out and decided to test 10 different tools and figure out which one works. Like, this is what we have. Let's test it and see what we can get with it.
I like it. I think, Julianne, it's still great because I also write notes, and then Yvonne, I see your hand as well. I wrote down, compared to knowledge graph, a couple of my other favorite tools, or using that word tooling, value network analysis, which the final report, the output of a VNA looks a lot like a knowledge graph. But Julianne, to your point, it's a very different thinking. You're mapping tangible and intangible flow, which is a lot different than mapping relationship between nodes, right? So
interesting.
right. So then there's pros and cons. There's like
Mm.
What brought me to that thinking, and why would I use that tool instead of another one? Let alone, even if we go even simpler, a mind map, right? That's just an almost generic, just draw a chart with what pops up for you. What thoughts do you have, and what thoughts are related to? You don't even have to label the relationships. It's just, here's animal. And when I think of animal, I think of dog and cow. And when I think of cow, I think of calf and white and brown and spotted. Interesting. That's what I think of. Like mind map. So, again, the final output is similar, but yeah, the tooling, I came from a very different space to get there. But Yvonne, did I scare you off? Sorry, I saw your hand go down.
Oh, no, I've just not the first time. This is actually my first time, so I don't want to break into anybody's conversation. Just want to making sure. Yeah, I feel like this is the interesting topic because for me, I'm not a native USA. So a lot of time I need to interpreting what this mean in USA versus what this mean in my own upbringing's roots, which is the Chinese culture. Often a lot whenever, especially talking with friends that like coming up from the Christian or some kind of background. So a lot of time interpretation is needed. So also when when you try to explain to people, really the goal is what kind of put there to direct people towards what kind of graph, what kind of explanation, what kinds of tables, what kind of presentations that you try to present to make sure the goal is achieved. Because if the goal are different, then the graph is probably different. Because maybe if I'm learning something, I want to go really fundamental, I probably want the graph relatively simple. It's more like tree diagram. I want to make sure things can be rooted back into its various originated from. But whenever I'm trying to explain to people, I maybe need to try to see what is people's background and then try to create or craft the graph to the way that they can be able to relate, because maybe they don't have the background that I have. So any kind of graph that I created for me doesn't mean that it works for her or for him. So I think knowing your audience is very important. And also creating graph, I feel like for me, I'm more paper, pencil person. I feel like not go to the online, not go to computer first, but get yourself a tranquil moment to just get your thoughts down first and then articulate it further down will help me to make the most of the graph presenting. And I also feel like oftentimes, especially in the web design, that people use graph just to think about this awakening their interest instead of trying to grant their knowledge. And I feel like a lot of websites show this beautiful graph with so many colors, but mean nothing. I don't feel like that's a kind of waste. I feel like, as people said earlier, that real graph or real diagram is to reflecting the essence of the knowledge, but not kind of a chattering or kind of just decoration. It shouldn't be just decoration to me. I feel like at times it should go back to the ground and then link back to the fundamentals. And that's all what I want to say. Thank you.
Mm.
Thank you.
I agree. But, these tools that are out there, we have to remember that they're competition based. And a lot of times, sometimes they don't make sense. So we need to not make them make sense, but we need to have them make sense before we actually use them. Because I agree, a lot of times that I think people are just drawing things, and when they see it, they go, wow, this is great. And if it's more complex, then it's really great too. But with these knowledge graphs, I really think that because it's knowledge, you need to start out with what you need to know. Even like with the taxonomy for the kingdom, they started out with the species, and then they decomposed them down to the subcomponents of them, and then the subcomponents, so that you can then relate them. And it's the same way that I'm saying, like with the business taxonomy, you start out with what does a person need to know for strategic direction within an organization, and when you have those areas, then you begin to break them down to the next level and the next level until you get to the instance level, and you can then create or explode out into these knowledge maps. But it all, I think back even to like project management. We've been doing networks. Like you look at project management, and they have what is it, the for the schedule, the scheduling network, so to speak, so that you can do load leveling and balancing and all of that. And it's the same type of concept where you have an arc on an arc or arc on a node. And I just don't think that that concept has changed. I think now, because we're talking knowledge, we want to give it a new name again, and we want to give it a new methodology. But yet, I think we need to use the same sense making that we used then, because that did work. So we have these examples. So Julia, I'm still with you on that context. I think you got to have that context, and you have to have the representation. And you know what, when you're going through this and the representation doesn't make sense to you, then the tool may not be. Because I was looking at what
Yep.
Barbara wrote too with the black box. A lot of them are object
Yep.
based, so you have no idea what they're doing.
Thank you.
Uh-oh, somebody's still not muted. Oh, that's right. I'm the
Right.
host. So
Got the power. You can help her out. I'm looking at Barbara, your link right now. NASA's knowledge graph. It's got, there's a few examples on here, but one of them is it's got space team in the middle, and then related to space team, it's got meetings, documentation, marketing, development, product engineering, and ideation.
I'm trying to figure out where I mute this thing at. Oh, I got it. Where are we at here? All right, y'all owe me for
hosting.
Okay. There it is. For hosting. Okay. We've got silence again.
Where would you like to take it? More knowledge graph or more digital transformation, or what's got our interest for the whole group?
How do you think the knowledge graphs relate to digital transformation? Because that's where I'm seeing that taxonomy and starting at what you need to know level is very important. So I want to throw that question out there.
And it looked like Pascal unmuted for a second, and maybe Liz too.
Yeah, this is Liz. I was thinking about something, John, that you said earlier about a knowledge graph. Whoops, now my camera's closed. Like one knowledge graph could just be like the systems, right? And I started thinking about like my team of knowledge managers and the group of people that we create knowledge for. And I was thinking, I wonder if they even realize, like if we've ever presented to them visually how all these systems work together. So honestly, I've kind of been stuck on that since you said it. And I know like it might be one of many, right? So that like systems graph might be one of many that you're building for knowledge management. But it just kind of was like a little bit of a light bulb moment. Like, I wonder if we've ever really presented it that way to people. Like you had mentioned, like SharePoint and like most organizations, we have many things, right? We have our own laptops where we hoard stuff, right? We hoard knowledge. We have SharePoint. We have Teams. We have a customer relationship management tool. We have a learning management system. And I don't think that we've ever really intelligently put out to the group, these are how these systems work. This is the purpose. So if you're using it for this purpose, maybe it's not meeting our organizational goals, or maybe our culture is driving us to use something that really isn't serving like our larger knowledge management goals. But that's what I've been thinking about with graphs. Like, I don't even know that we did that for them, and I think it could be really useful.
Love it. Yeah, thanks, Liz. The thought that pops up first for me there is something I've kind of learned the hard way by, not being as polite and as kind as I would like to be with all people. I made this big assumption that systems thinking, especially in knowledge management circles, I just assumed systems thinking was something we were all interested in. So yeah, I love the graphs and the maps and the relationships between stuff, but I've learned the hard way that I don't know if I can say a lot of people, but there's definitely people in the world that would rather not see the bigger picture. They're much more interested. It was almost what Annie was saying about, like, in the kingdom, phylum, species thing. Some personalities, some brains work by breaking things down, and some brains work by building things up, right? And so, yeah, what I hear from you, Liz, there is like that. Like, how could we create knowledge graphs that can show systems level thinking? But then also, is there other, to Julianne's original point, which I'm loving from this whole call already, is there some other tooling? Is there some other approach? One that would give a systems thinking view. Here's all of our systems and how they work together. And then some other view that says, here's system one and what it does and how to work with it and everything about system one. Totally separate graph, totally separate documentation that here's system two. If you want to focus on that, here's where you go here. And of course, since everything is digital, maybe this takes us to digital transformation, Annie. Maybe it is literally setting up so that I can click, I can tap.
Yeah.
Right? I can tap on something and it builds me up, or I can tap in a different way and it breaks me down. And also, Liz, so that was one, systems thinking versus, I don't know, detailed thinking. Complicated thinking would probably be the opposite. Enterprise architecture.
That's where I was going.
Yeah, to Julianne's point, like, again, like, knowledge graphs do one thing. They show relationships between nodes, or I think they call them topics in a knowledge graph. Fine. A value network analysis, it looks the same, but it shows tangible and intangible flow. You could have a whole systems architecture that shows the literal, what do we call them in IT? APIs, application programming interfaces. What are the macros? What data literally, tangibly flows between systems? But then how much trust?
Right.
So everybody loves this system. Everybody hates this system.
Right.
Value network analysis shows that, the stuff you can't quite see or touch. But then enterprise architecture, I wouldn't say it looks the same because it does look different. But when I've seen beautiful, like US Department of Defense has this beautiful multi-million-dollar enterprise architecture. Huge, ridiculous document. If you see it physically printed, it takes up a whole wall. You can Google it and look at it. The fonts are so tiny on it that you have to have, like, literally a magnifying glass to see it. But it shows thousands of systems, all the different, every single database, every single website that, has hundreds of thousands of people's access to it, and what flows between them. Enterprise architecture, though, it's not a knowledge graph. It's not a value network analysis. The other one I want to drop is organizational network analysis, which has nothing to do with technology at all. That's just pure human beings. What's the relationship between human beings? The output looks almost identical to all these tools we're talking about, but it was Yvonne, right? It said totally different goal, totally different purpose, and hopefully more than a decoration. It's literally a different way.
But yeah, no, I agree. And John, you brought up a really, really good picture to me, because even though value networking, okay, you still have to look at the value points that is coming from. And every single one of them are the ones that I kind of portrayed as value to an organization. If you do ERP, that's systems, right? So technology. If you look at people, that's employees, okay? If you look at partners, you got contractors. So each one of those are one of those value areas, right? And enterprise, to be honest with you, enterprise architecture will really help with the technology, and would also help with the relationship, because if those graphs are so great, then they should be able to have some type of scorecard or some type of dashboard that shows them that they're buying a package that they already have one of, and be able to tell them the difference in the two if you've taken it down to a level in your network that you can identify the capabilities of the tool. So again, it's like the top down, going from the value. Technology brings value into my organization. So where do I go from here? How do I define that? And what is the bottom level, which is the capability? And that capability is how it helps you to perform your job. So if I have that into a system where the relationship is there and the networking between them are there, then I should be able to, based on my knowledge graph, be able to see what the impact would be if I switched out one system for another, because that's the whole point of valuing it.
That's nice. I really like that idea.
But John, he set the light bulb off when he started talking, and he was saying technology and people, and I'm like, those are still the same value areas that when you look at the surveys that the CEOs say they want to know. So the taxonomy for the organization is at basically these value areas, okay? That's where you start at the top, the same way like with the kingdom. You started at the top with the species and then you went down. And in other places, I mean, you can actually follow that same method when you decide you want a knowledge graph in a maybe not in a particular industry, but in a particular discipline. You know.
So Pascal unmuted for a second there. Pascal.
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't think I.
Oh, maybe not. All right. I was looking at Barbara's chart here, and it's so funny, like labeling things. Like, so I pulled it up, Barbara. Like I want my. I think this is my first time seeing this particular chart or graph. I can't quite read it. I've zoomed in, and it gets a little blurry when I zoom in. I'm wondering, is it a knowledge graph, or is it one of these other tools?
Yeah, I think it's
about.
It's almost a form of concept mapping.
Yeah, but,
Yeah.
ooh.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's trying to visualize or map the relationships between different things that affect a situation. In that case, it was Afghanistan, some situation there. But it is a complex set of relationship between various factors. I think it's a completely different thing from a knowledge graph. But when we talk about maps, graphs, and other types of visual representations of complexity, I think we need to be clear about what it is that we're really talking about.
I like this thing that's emerging for me is
absolutely.
Annie, I'm getting it from you. It's I don't think it's the first question, but one of the first questions is, what are the types of nodes that we're looking at? The word nodes. So yes, on this Afghanistan one, I see overall government capacity. I see ANSF tactical. I see popular support. So those are like big nodes. Well, that's obviously not a person's name, and that's obviously not a physical object. So whoever created this graph, one of their first questions is, they must have had some kind of intuitive sense of what are the big nodes,
or what do you need to know.
Yeah.
And break it down to that simple question: what do I need to know, and call it what it is. And like you said, if you read that, they're actually telling you each knowledge area that they need to know about, and then they're looking at the components that come under it that will be able to give them that information. Or give them that knowledge. I shouldn't say information. The information below that will be able to give them that knowledge and the data that feeds into those knowledge systems.
Then can I throw out oh, go ahead, Barbara.
So is one of the differences between these types of even though there's a tool used to draw the map, it's like still a human came up with the connections and stuff like that. Is that the big difference between a concept map, a knowledge map versus a graph? A knowledge graph, which actually comes from some AI or machine learning based on a model or algorithm. This is where I'm trying to grasp the difference between
I don't get the difference in those names. I don't know why they call something a map or why they call it a graph. I really, I'm just looking at the complexity of them and how do you decompose them. So I think about the system and where do I start in context. In context, and I use the enterprise because that right now is kind of like my focus in strategy, okay, and strategic formulation. So where's my start? My context is strategic formulation within an enterprise. And then, okay, what do I need to know in order to have a good strategy? And so that second layer is the knowledge I need to know. And then I break those down in thinking about each of the intangible assets that I need to know. And then I break the intangible assets down into information that feed into them, and then hopefully tie them into data that would actually give measures and indicators. But I think a lot of times, and a good friend of mine we used to always say, it's verbiage, it's verbiage. They need to stop the verbiage. You know, it's like, I think because everybody wants their piece of the pie, that a lot of times what we do is we change the term so that we can own it. And there's no definition of it. And so we have to look at what is the purpose and how is the use of it important to us.
So funny, because that's where my mind was going to. And Barbara, I wonder if you've got a gut reaction to this. Like on this chart, what do you think they did with it? What like sense making or action taking or planning? Do you know what they did, or does I think maybe I've even got a broader question. If you had a knowledge graph, anybody in this group, if you had a knowledge graph, what would you likely do with it? What would you want to do with it? Because for me, it's sense making. I'm looking to
it's sense making to me.
understand. And then where I also personally get pretty excited is then meaning making. So if I can understand something in my brain, maybe my mind, then I'm looking to sort of go deeper into my heart and be like, so what does, I understand this Afghanistan stability map now. I don't, but if I did, now it would be like, what does that mean for me? Like what meaning?
Yeah, I think part of it was, well, I'm not sure. I'm imagining that part of it was trying to find the entry point, like the areas where interventions could actually have the intended impact without creating other, well, where do you start? Like if you have to intervene in this map, where are the entry points? Where are the how would you, if you look at it and you're almost like, well, you can't do anything about it. It's way too complex. It's like, what do I do? There's nothing to do there. It's just a big mess.
Yep.
But if you have to intervene, how do you use the map to understand how your action in one corner is going to impact the rest of the map? Like,
this is why here's the tools again. There were tools that I think will be very effective, and I know Yvonne has done that, but there are tools that I think would be very effective with this in that systems engineering. Okay, systems engineering kind of got destroyed. For some reason, they decided to call it network engineering, and that's not what we did. What we did was take complexity and make it simple by decomposing it from the context level on down to the primitive level so that you could understand. But there were tools that you could actually put that in and develop the relationships amongst them. So those tools would help you with like a myriad of views so you could see how things actually related with each other. The table that you're looking at or the map that you're looking at, it's the complexity of it. I wouldn't even use it because it's going to overwhelm you already. You're looking at this and you don't have a way to actually break it down. It's even like with the graphs, and coming as a systems engineer, you learn the leveling of things. You learn how to regroup things so that they make sense, and and it's right back to like that normalization. You learn how to have independence in things, and then to have dependencies, and to be able to do what do you call the indexes that actually aren't like primary keys, so to speak. And even though I'm talking data, it works in this type of structure so that you can have indexes that cross over to other systems. And a nice tool helps you to do that. I know System Architect was a very good tool to do that. I don't know how it works now, but I know that a lot of people didn't use these tools because they didn't understand or they didn't go through the formal training of how you would do decomposition of certain entities. And I think that's posed a serious problem in today's world. System thinking is not something that is in the forefront. Most people don't have system thinking right now, and they don't have critical thinking. And that was all taught in engineering concepts. So I'm with you. I look at those charts and I don't want to say they're pretty and I don't want to say that they're good because to me, they're convoluted and they don't make sense.
Mm.
And I think with knowledge graphs, it's the same thing. But one thing that we need to realize is that if you're going to use knowledge to help guide your decisions, then you need to, like Barbara said, you need to be very clear in what and how you're laying that out. Because if those are critical decisions, then you get into the realm of security. And you're going to need to protect those so that they are not exposed out and then threaten, your performance or your viability. And I'm going to stop because I know Yvonne's had her hand up for a while.
Hello, can I be heard? Hi, can I be heard?
Uh-huh.
Oh, okay, thank you. I'll check the pictures also, and I do feel like it's definitely meet some current needs for people because they just need a wow kind of thing to respond, and probably for them the colorfulness, the maze-like structure that make them feel like, wow, this is a complicated issue. I don't think people just want to go anything further down besides just the over bird view eye on it. I mean, it's really hard to see where to start to me. And I think pictures attract to those people who is more looking for arty and just catchy. But if you want to solve the problem, then you need another layers of understanding. As people said earlier, a little bit clearness, a little bit about focus, and where to start. Is this should be one whole big thing, or maybe several layers of a couple of small steps building up as for graphs or goals. So I do feel like pictures they kind of mismatch the purpose nowadays so often, because oftentimes people want to catchy, but they lost the most essence of picture or diagrams, which is the meaning for clearness, or give people a hands or guide to some problems. And that's number one I want to phrase. And number two, I feel like people also mentioned about different names of diagrams. I feel like those names also put people into cage, because whenever you name it something differently, you bring up layers of confusion to different people, because people don't know what you're talking about. This is what I see so often in the modern language, because I'm crossing discipline when my work change, and I, like in IT, like in business analyst, like in the teaching, education view, or maybe entrepreneurship view, they maybe talk about the same thing, but they all use different names. And then it's like after so long time in investigation, it was like, oh, this is what that means. And for me, I need to also add the layers of complexity, which I'm trying. So I want to use one or two characters to name what that really means to me. So I feel like just navigating through the names bring another layers of maze to us, and then get us confused too. So pictures and diagrams supposed to be standing out of those names, and then out of people's mind of their understanding, instead of reverse the direction. That's what I feel. Thank you.
Yeah, I think people need to understand skill sets are not just that they're learned, and that you have to be trained in these proper skill sets in order to perform the work. And, people need to stop looking at complex diagrams and thinking that that means intelligence, because it doesn't. It's spaghetti, and it's not decomposed properly. So I really do think that we need to go back to systems thinking and, the Senge approach and systems engineering, and where we take from the context and decompose these things so that we're aware of each of the levels of abstractions that occur within our organizations and within the work that we do.
Barbara says it beautifully in text too, where she says, who's the audience, right? That's a whole nother layer of this map. Like if you were creating this map for 5-year-old, your language would be different, the map would be different. If you're creating it to break down a network of people, you're going to draw it differently. It's, what's coming up so loud for me at this point in the conversation is the old, the map is not the territory. Like every one of these graphs or maps or approaches is one biased view of what's going on. And so the systems thinking for me is which biased views have the most value for me right now? Which map do I want to look at? The topography map or the road map or the, I don't know, the weather map? They're all same place, but a very different context, and probably, Barbara, a different audience, different.
Well, that brings you back to what you asked earlier. It is the mindset. I think I wrote down three things: mindset, tool set, and skill set.
Skill set. Yep, that's it.
And so we've got to change the mindset. We've got to become aware of the tool sets, and we've got to validate the skill sets.
Have some kind of practice, some kind of skill
Mm-hmm.
that you've thought about and practiced for a while. Yep.
And
So,
I'm also wondering, oh, did I need to raise my hand?
go ahead, Yvonne.
Oh, hi, how are you? I'm just wondering because I feel like this is desperate need for this type of diagrams and then clear and clean cut of the explanation because of that. And I wonder where the market are, because I'm coming into my current field and hope I can do some more of those, but I don't feel like they're doing that way. So I'm always searching for something that I can give me a scenario that I can create some kind of things like that. And I'm definitely open to people here to talk more about it, maybe get maybe a chat for 10, 15 minutes, but it's like, I feel like the skills, that mindset, the skill set, and some other set, I feel like I do have it, but I don't know where to play with it. There's no, seems like everybody have their own thing of doing things, but what we need, what I feel like I can offer is more of a creative way, because you need to think out the box, but whenever you are inside the box, it's really hard to think out. So it's like, it's really where the interdisciplinary areas, the creation starts, and then you can, this is the initiative, but you kind of massage together with the people by the specialties or speeds to be able to create something that speaks for their needs. But I don't know where are the needs for that, because I don't feel like my consulting current customers there, they're looking for that. They're just looking for something that have been created, the old cliche, and they just want to do it. And they don't want to do anything new, because new of them being uncomfortable, I mean, extra work doesn't pay. So what I feel like a bit confused.
I love it, Yvonne, and it brought up for me, I kind of want to take a big risk. I'll kind of share my closing thought, because I'm looking at Pascal and Tara and assuming and Liz, thinking we're about to wrap up. So I want to take a little bit of a risk and read, if my voice holds out, a really short poem that I would have never thought would come up in a KM call. But I think it's, Yvonne, so related to what you were saying. And now that I'm reading it, I think it is actually related to knowledge graphs in the strangest way. So Yvonne, let me try this for you and for everybody, and then Annie and Liz and Tara and everybody. Here you go. Short poem, relatively short. It's by Martha Postlethwaite. It's called The Clearing. If you haven't heard it before, it goes like this. Do not try to save the whole world or do anything grandiose. Instead, create a clearing in the dense forest of your life and wait there patiently until the song that is your life falls into your own cupped hands and you recognize it and greet it. Only then will you know how to give yourself to this world so worthy of rescue. The Clearing by Martha Postlethwaite.
The Clearing.
The Clearing. There you go. Somehow I think that's related, but maybe that's just me at 8:30 p.m. on a Wednesday. Annie,
Well,
how would you close?
How would I close? I like this conversation because it stimulates thought. But, one thing that I think that we need to happen with these knowledge graphs, because, knowledge is what we take in to do action, is that people need to actually speak up. When it doesn't make sense, tell them it doesn't make sense. Stop wrecking your brains trying to make sense of something that wasn't developed in a manner in which it makes sense. It's got to be, I know with other types of architectural diagrams that I work with, I followed methods that helped me to not have crossovers, to make them clear, to not have so many at a certain level, and to decompose them so that you could see each level. We've got to start doing that again. And so skilled people and people who are knowledgeable and when something doesn't make sense, say it doesn't make sense. Okay.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Tara, Pascal, Liz, I see Yvonne's hand up too. Where should we go now?
I would say it's a really good time for us to wrap up, even though the discussion has been wonderful. Thank you all for contributing to this conversation. It's been great. And thank you so much, John and Annie, because, one of the things, for those of you who don't know, John was the one who got me interested, or rather, he gardened my interest in knowledge management, and so this decades ago, and I'm so grateful to have developed that relationship with him, and to have him back here in this community, which he helped start 9.5 years ago.
At least, who knows? Yep.
And it's just wonderful. Thank you so much for all you've given to knowledge management, both of you. So I really appreciate you coming here and helping the community to keep going. And we're gonna record. We have this recording. It's going to be online. We have our YouTube channel, KMCDC Group Monthly Meeting YouTube channel, where we post all of our monthly meetings. So we'll definitely be putting this out there so it becomes now a knowledge nugget of our community for other reference for future generations. So thank you all for being part of this meeting, and I hope to see you at the next monthly meeting. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Which I don't want to.
Thank you for watching KMCDC's presentation. Hope to see you at the next monthly meeting.